Hi, everyone. I see quite a few participants trickling in, and let me wait just a minute to see if there's a slowdown and we can go ahead and start. Maybe I'll wait just one more minute. Awesome. Great to see such participation and interest on this topic. Sophie, I don't see the slide. Is it me or the way I'm viewing my Zoom window?
Are others able to see it?
I can see it.
Okay. Oh, you know what? Never mind. I can see it now. Great. Okay, great. I think we're ready to start. So thank you, everyone. It's great to see all of you participating in this webinar, and I want to say hello and welcome from wherever in the world that you're joining. This is a globally relevant topic, aligning NDCs and long-term strategies, and specifically focused on the transport sector. So, I want to mention that this is a follow-up to a webinar series that has been a collaboration and a partnership between the Clean Energy Solutions Center and the Global Climate Action Partnership. So welcome to everyone, and we have a lineup of distinguished speakers that are going to touch on transport-related themes to help support you plan and think about your next NDC updates, which are coming up early next year in 2025. Okay, with that, I think we can move on to the next slide. Yes, I would like to now hand it over to my colleague, Sophie, to go over a few housekeeping details. Over to you, Sophie.
Hello, everyone. I will make this super brief. As you may have noticed upon entering today's session, this webinar is being recorded, and the purpose for that is so that we can share the recording following the event with all participants and registrants. Everyone will automatically be muted throughout today's session. However, we strongly encourage you to use the chat feature, which it seems you all are already making use of, to participate in the conversation. And then please do use the Q&A function, which can be found at the bottom of your toolbar, to ask questions. We will be having a Q&A at the end of today's session, and we'll be answering the questions found that have been submitted through the Q&A function. So please do use that. If you encounter any technical issues throughout today, please reach out to myself, Sophie Schrader, or my colleague, Holly, and we'll do our best to support you. And all of your audio can be adjusted through the audio settings. So if you're having any issues, you can either dial in, or you also are able to select the language of your choice to listen in, as well as to have closed captions in. One of our speakers later on in today's session will be speaking in Spanish, so it really is important to select the closed caption language that you would like to hear and read the presentation in. And lastly, at the end of today's session, a survey will pop up. We do review every single survey response, and those responses help inform future webinars. So please do consider providing us with feedback so that we can make future sessions even better. And with that, back to you, Sanjini.
Thanks, Sophie. And also, I think, Sophie, you mentioned that if any questions come up, please feel free to put it in the chat and we can address them. Great. So with that, let's move on to a brief outline of what to expect in today's webinar. We will start off with a brief introduction and overview of the Global Climate Action Partnership and the Clean Energy Solutions Center. As I said at the beginning, this webinar series is a close collaboration between these two initiatives, and we are focused currently on bringing you an understanding of how to think through the transport sector, NDCs, and long-term strategies. So with that in mind, we are going to be talking about what does it mean to decarbonize the transport sector in order to meet your long-term climate targets. We have a lineup of great speakers that can give you initial ideas of what might be good to put into a new NDC and how best to align with the long-term strategy as well. And we are going to showcase an example from Quito, a sustainable mobility project from Ecuador. And we hope this case study and explanation will give you new ideas on how other countries have good practices and ideas on NDCs and LTSs as well. And we will finally talk about a high ambition transport group that is being just launched and implemented in the Latin America and Caribbean region through the Global Climate Action Partnership. And once again, the theme throughout this webinar is planning, raising ambition, and making sure that all our policies and technical projects are well aligned with national NDCs and long-term strategies. And we can move on to the next slide. So as I mentioned, we have multiple speakers lined up today. As for myself, my name is Sanjini Nanayakkara, and I will be your moderator today. I'm the Global Climate Action Partnerships Asia Regional Lead located in the National Renewable Energy Lab in Colorado, USA. So the speakers lined up today are Aaron Ng from the United States Department of Energy, who will be talking to us about the Clean Energy Solutions Center. And then we have Dale Hall from the International Council on Clean Transportation. Dale Hall is a senior researcher focused on light-duty electric vehicles, and he has been working there since 2016. As a part of the International Partnerships Program, Dale administers the ICCT's duties as a secretariat for the International Zero Emission Vehicle Alliance, which is a coalition of 20 governments committed to transitioning to zero emission vehicles. He also works with leading European and North American cities in the C40 network and beyond to implement electric vehicle strategies, particularly on issues of charging infrastructure, planning, zero freight, and shared mobility. We then have our next speaker is Carolina Chantrell from Sucentar. Carolina is the Director of Sustainable Mobility at Sucentar. And in this role, she oversees the association's activities aimed at promoting low emission, sustainability, and resilience strategies in the transport and mobility sector, assisting with decision makers, building capacity through knowledge exchange and peer learning spaces, and strengthening networks of professionals and organizations. Carolina is also the co-chair of the Lead Slag Steering Committee, and we look forward to her presentation as well. And finally, today's last speaker is Enrique from the United Nations Office for Project Services, or also known as UNOPS, and we will be hearing about a Quito case study from him later in the presentation. Great, so we can move on to the next slide, Sophie. So I'm going to start us off very briefly describing the Global Climate Action Partnership. This Global Climate Action Partnership is a newly rebranded name, but our initial program was launched in 2011. And for the longest time, we've been Let's GP, which is Let's Global Partnership. And so we are the same partnership, but just rebranded and renamed to, to make sure that we're accounting for all the types of work that we work with our partners. In this case, over the years, we've accumulated more than 4,500 climate leaders that have worked with us. We focus on peer learning, technical collaboration, exchanging of good practices, lessons learned, and also in some cases, supporting through technical assistance as well. Our primary focus right now is implementation of ambitious NDCs and long-term strategies. As you can see, this is a theme that has been ongoing throughout this year through our partnership and many other international organizations that we work closely with. All our efforts are country and demand driven, and we work globally. Specifically, we have regional platforms in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean region. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, our work with our stakeholders and country partners are always country driven. And we do support NDC implementation, planning, and alignment with long-term strategies. We support the adoption of new or improved regulatory or policy frameworks to create enabling environments for current and future climate action. With this, what we aim to do is support cities and governments develop bankable, replicable, and scalable projects that are aligned with their long-term strategies. We hope that with the support that we're providing, countries can mobilize investments through partnerships in order to implement pilot projects, which that can then further be scaled up. And of course, quite a bit of what we do is capacity building and supporting the analysis and modeling of certain technical challenges as well. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we work in globally across 3 regions. Here, what you're seeing is our 3 regional platforms: the Africa Climate Action Partnership, Asia LEDS Partnership, and LEDS LAC. And what you see here is, as I mentioned, we are a country-driven, demand-driven initiative. So we respond to the regional needs. And so these regional needs can change over time. In what you're seeing here is at the moment what each region is focusing on as a high priority for activities moving towards replanning their NDCs. Next slide, please. Okay, great. And so with this, I would like to now hand it over to Aaron Ng to give us an overview of the Clean Energy Solutions Center. Over to you, Aaron.
Thanks, Sanjini. We can go to the next slide. I'm Aaron Ng with the U.S. Department of Energy, as Sanjini mentioned, and I work on both GCAP and the Solutions Center with the Clean Energy Ministerial, but I'll talk a little bit more about the Clean Energy Solutions Center today. But first, just want to thank everyone for joining the webinar. Hopefully it's not your first time on this webinar, so I'll try and keep this introduction brief. As mentioned, today's webinar is brought to you in part by the Clean Energy Solutions Center. The Clean Energy Solutions Center is an initiative of the Clean Energy Ministerial, which is itself a collaboration of 29 countries to rapidly increase the deployment of clean energy technologies globally. The Solutions Center is led by the governments of Australia and the United States and is operated by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, which, as you've all been introduced, supports both GCAP and the Solutions Center. The whole idea of the Solutions Center is to support developing governments with the capacity to design and adopt policies and programs to deploy clean energy technologies. Next slide. We do that in 3 ways. The first is through our Ask an Expert service. This service is available to any government that needs additional capacity to support a clean energy question or policy issue, and it is available free of charge to developing countries. All you need to do is go to our website and apply to get that question answered. In the history of the Clean Energy Solutions Center, we've answered over 300 requests, and we hope to answer yours. Another way that we support governments is through training and capacity building. We've done over 300 webinars like the one that we're co-hosting today, which are also available on the Clean Energy Solutions Center website as a resource for members and participants around the world. And finally, our resource library not only includes our past webinars, but other reports, policy briefs, journal articles, etc., to help support the rapid deployment of clean energy technologies globally. Given that governments will be working on their NDCs and deploying transportation technologies and looking to implement any NDCs and long-term strategies to come, I am glad we can share best practices and lessons learned on webinars like today's. And if you find today's webinar helpful, I would encourage you to leverage the resources mentioned in Sanjini's introduction and mine, such as reaching out to GCAP to support your climate ambitions through its regional platforms and tailored technical assistance, as well as the SEM Clean Energy Solution Center's Ask an Expert service to answer your clean energy questions. I hope you enjoyed today's webinar, and I hope to see you all at future webinars. Now back to Sanjini.
Thank you, Aaron. We can move to the next slide, Sophie. And as Aaron mentioned, if you have any questions, please place it in the chat. If not, and we're happy to take on any new requests and any other questions about how the Clean Energy Solutions Center operates. So with that, we're going to move on to the presentation by Dale Hall from ICCT. So over to you, Dale.
Excellent. Thank you for the introduction, Sanjini and Aaron. Really interesting to hear about the work that you're doing with SIM. As Sanjini mentioned, my name is Dale Hall. I am a senior researcher at the ICCT, and today I have the very easy task of describing how to decarbonize the transport sector in about 20 minutes or so. So I look forward to any questions that you have. Please put them in the chat throughout. For anyone who's not familiar with the ICCT, we are an independent nonprofit research organization founded in 2005. We have offices and staff in all of the major vehicle markets worldwide, the US, Europe, China, Brazil, and India, as well as staff in some other countries like Colombia and Mexico and Indonesia. Our goal is to provide independent expert analysis to environmental regulators to help them make the best policies possible to improve the environmental performance of transportation, to benefit public health, and mitigate climate change. Today, our agenda, I will start out with a bit of a kind of big picture perspective on decarbonizing transport and what's needed and when. I'll talk about the role of zero emission vehicles in decarbonizing road transport, which is the main focus of my work, and where we stand in the transition to zero emission vehicles, as well as run through some policy options to accelerate the ZEV transition to align with Paris climate trajectory. And then if we have time, I will talk a little bit about other aspects of the transport sector, including aviation and maritime. But I'll start out with the big picture perspective. Why do we need to decarbonize transport? I think everyone on the call is aware of the imperative of reducing emissions rapidly, and transport is a big part of that. It accounts for about 1/4 of greenhouse gas emissions from energy globally, higher in some countries. And in contrast to some other sectors, transport emissions are continuing to grow. Over the past couple decades, transport and industry have been tied as the fastest growing sectors. And the transport sector today is heavily reliant on fossil fuels, specifically oil, accounting for over 90% of energy supply. And beyond climate, transport is also a huge air pollution issue. Our research estimates that it accounts for at least 380,000 premature deaths from air pollution every year, primarily in urban centers in emerging markets. Now, within the transport sector, where are these emissions coming from? You can see the breakdown on the chart here on the screen. Road transport accounts for 3/4 of all transport-related emissions. Biggest part of that is passenger vehicles, mostly cars, but also motorcycles, light vehicles. But freight is also a really significant part of that equation, almost a third of all transport emissions. Aviation and shipping are smaller, about 10% each, but those are two of the fastest growing segments and more hard to abate, as I'm sure you have heard. But really, road transport is the bulk of emissions today, and that is an opportunity to make very rapid progress in bringing transport sector emissions down, as we will describe. So what are the solutions available for decarbonizing road transport? Well, a lot of solutions have been proposed, but many of them do not really stand up to scrutiny or are not scalable on the timeframes that we have to work with. So, for example, hybrids and plug-in hybrids are really important technologies for getting incremental near-term reductions and using less fossil fuels, but they cannot offer true zero emissions potential in the long term. Biofuels, there's a mix of different solutions that have higher or lower emissions, but the biofuels with the largest supply tend to have high greenhouse gas emissions associated with land use change, and the more sustainable biofuels have limited feedstock and a lot of competition from other sectors. And e-fuels can offer zero carbon emissions, but they are very costly due to the low efficiency in their production. And so they are expected to remain very expensive and really are a poor use of our limited renewable energy. So the remaining solution is zero emission vehicles, primarily battery electric vehicles. And as you can see on this chart, battery electric vehicles already have much, much lower life cycle emissions compared to combustion engine vehicles, and those will reduce even further as we shift toward renewable energy. Fuel cells can play a role, especially for heavy duty vehicles. On the light duty side, they tend to be much more expensive, and so we don't envision them playing a very significant role, but they can also offer steep emissions reductions if they are powered with green hydrogen from renewable energy. Now, the good story is that not only do electric vehicles offer big emissions reductions, but they are coming down in cost. We're already seeing in most major markets, electric vehicles being similar on a total cost of ownership basis. So looking at the cost of the vehicle as well as fuel and maintenance over a 5 to 6 year period. And by the end of this decade, we expect electric vehicles to be less expensive to buy and less expensive to run than internal combustion engine vehicles. So that's great. We have a tool and it's cost effective, so we need to move quickly. This chart shows the projection of where the zero emission vehicle market is headed without new policy. We can see that in all types of vehicles, cars, buses, trucks, it would be a minority of new vehicle sales even out to 2040. What we need to do to stay on a Paris-aligned trajectory is to reach 100% new vehicle sales in all vehicle segments by 2040 globally. And especially for cars and buses, it should be close to 90% globally by 2035. And the really good progress, over half of sales, even by 2030. So we need to move much more quickly if we're going to keep road transport on an under 2 degree pathway. Where are we in the ZEV transition today? Well, the market has seen really impressive growth over the past several years. Last year, there were over 14 million light-duty electric vehicles sold. That was about 16% of all sales, of all new light-duty vehicle sales. You can see that China is by far the largest market, followed by the US and the European Union. But the rest of world's bar there is really growing. The transition is broadening across all parts of the world, which we'll talk more about later. On the heavy duty side, it's more of a bumpy ride. You can see here that China plays an even more dominant role, accounting for over 90% of buses and 95% of electric trucks sold worldwide. But you can see Europe, especially, as well as the rest of the world, mostly India and Latin America, growing in the bus side. So there has been some turbulence, but there's a promising trajectory over the past couple of years, and it appears that we're on an upward trend, especially on electric trucks, which is really critical for long-term emissions reductions pathways. Now, the past couple of slides have really highlighted China, Europe, and the US as the largest electric vehicle markets. They are the largest in terms of volume, but we're seeing really exciting progress all over the world. And I've highlighted just a couple examples here of countries that are becoming leaders in this space. So Chile has the largest electric bus fleet outside of China in the world, over 2,500 electric buses operating in the capital of Santiago. In Jordan, electric vehicles are already about 7% of all the cars on the road. That's actually higher than in California, which is known as a leader on EVs. Thailand is really the leader in Southeast Asia, 12% electric car market share. That's as high as a lot of countries in Europe. And their electric motorcycle market is growing about 50% year over year. And in Ethiopia, really a huge unexpected success story. They banned new fossil fuel vehicle imports and have seen 100,000 electric cars now sold, showing that with strong policy action, any country can become a leader in the electric vehicle transition. So a lot of exciting stories to watch. And the good news is that we have been making progress. I know it's a complicated chart, but what you should focus on is that a couple of years ago, the baseline projection was that transport emissions would rise and rise and rise out through 2050. Policies adopted in the past 3 years have brought that down so that emissions are projected to at least plateau. And if government commitments are turned into action, as shown in the dark green segment, then emissions would start coming down over the next couple of decades. But we need to move faster on the zero emission vehicle transition to bring road transport into alignment and bring it under 2 degrees in pathway. So how do we do that? How do we take advantage of the zero emission vehicle technology to bring road transport better aligned with Paris Agreement targets? At the ICCT, we have a framework with 5 main categories of policies: phase-out targets to set a long-term vision, binding regulations to ensure that cleaner vehicles are available and sold at greater numbers, financial incentives to make zero-emission vehicles cost-effective, charging infrastructure, of course, to power those vehicles, and consumer awareness and fleet programs to ensure that everyone is aware of how zero-emission vehicles can work for them. We'll go through each of these just very briefly. On the phased-out targets or 100% ZEV commitments, we're seeing increasing alignment around commitments to go 100% zero-emission vehicles by 2035 for light-duty vehicles in leading markets, and 100% heavy duty by 2040, but there's still some gaps. You can see that some countries like China and the United States and Mexico have set interim commitments, but not yet fully committed to going to 100% ZEV. And that's really important for showing industry that zero-emission vehicles are the pathway forward. Now, we need to turn those commitments and those aspirations into reality with binding policies. One way to do that is with CO2 or fuel efficiency standards. These are a tried and true policy that's adopted in many countries around the world, and they basically require every vehicle manufacturer or importer to make sure that their vehicles on average are cleaner every year than the last. And this could be by selling ZEVs as well as hybrids or just more efficient combustion vehicles. And you can see on this chart here that Europe, New Zealand, and Korea have some of the strongest policies in this space. So there's a lot of good lessons to learn from. Another pathway to follow is zero emission sales requirements. And this is much more straightforward. It just says that every manufacturer or importer to sell a certain share of zero emission vehicles every year. California was a pioneer in this type of policy. It led to California's leadership position, but a lot of other governments have followed. And now you can see that on the light duty side, the UK and some provinces in Canada have the strongest policies in the world, all aiming out toward 100% zero emission vehicle sales by 2035. And of course, I showed examples on the light duty side, but these can also be applied to heavy duty vehicles and even 2- and 3-wheelers, depending on the market. Moving on to fiscal policy. As I'm sure you're aware, incentives have played a role in spurring the early zero emission vehicle transition. They're still important, but they are being phased out as the cost of zero emission vehicles decline. And even leading markets like China and Germany and the United Kingdom and California have all said they are ending their kind of mass market incentive programs by the end of this year. Instead, governments are using fiscal policy to target very specific user groups and vehicle types to make the transition more just and equitable and also maximize the economic benefits. So for example, that could look like having very strict income requirements to allow low-income drivers to switch to electric vehicles, looking at areas with high pollution and getting commercial electric vehicles operating in those areas, and prioritizing small fleets, small businesses for commercial vehicle incentives. On the heavy duty side, incentives will be needed for longer, but even there, governments can look at using their funding very carefully and effectively to make the transition as just as possible. Charging infrastructure, I'm sure you're all aware, is one of the big barriers to transitioning to electric vehicles for cars as well as trucks, even more so. The good news here is that charging infrastructure is expanding everywhere. China has by far the most public charging points, but around the world, they are continuing to grow. And there's now over 4 million public chargers, and worldwide, even more private chargers. We project that the number of public chargers will have to grow about 30% year over year. The good news is we actually did more than that last year at a global level, but it's going to get harder as the market continues to grow and that baseline gets higher. So governments have an important role to play in setting standards, providing coordination between public and private investments, and making sure that the power grid is equipped to handle the installation of new chargers, especially for trucks and buses that use much higher power. And finally, just briefly, especially in the early stages of the market, awareness campaigns can be really useful for showing people that electric vehicles can work for them, whether it's for two-wheelers, cars, and trucks in the commercial space. There's some great examples of governments working with vehicle manufacturers, with power companies, and other stakeholders to demonstrate these benefits for all types of use cases. So that covers sort of the role of zero-emission vehicles and what we need to get there. That is what we work on primarily at the ITCT, but of course, we can't simply rely on new technology to deliver all of the emissions reductions. It's also important to try to shift away from vehicles and reduce the amount of vehicle miles traveled altogether. So avoid and shift strategies. Those can bring really big benefits in addition to transitioning to cleaner vehicles. You can see on the right side of the slide here, the amount of emissions reductions you can get by doing ZEVs plus avoid and shift on the far right versus only relying on ZEVs in that the high EV scenario. To achieve this, local level policies are really important, and cities can play a leading role in reallocating street space to public and active transport, building denser housing near transit so that cars are not required for all journeys, and also applying realistic pricing to parking and congestion and driving to account for the environmental and economic challenges that car reliance brings. And of course, it's important to have supporting national level frameworks as well to enable those. But in my last couple of minutes, I will just briefly cover those other two segments that I mentioned, aviation and maritime. Within the aviation space, there's two main strategies. The first is to reduce how much fuel you are using. And that can be done both through more efficient aircraft design, as well as operational efficiencies, more direct routing and maximizing the use of efficient flight paths. But in the longer term, we also need to change the fuel so that it's not as reliant on fossil fuels. That can come from electric aircraft, hydrogen-powered aircraft, and sustainable aviation fuels. In our modeling of what it would take to move aviation to net zero by 2050, we see sustainable aviation fuels playing the largest role. In the near term, that may include some biofuels. In the long term, electric e-fuels or power to liquids will probably account for the biggest share of that. But we really need a portfolio of solutions, including more efficient aircraft, demand reduction, and zero-emission aircraft for shorter trips to accomplish this transition. And finally, in the maritime sector, this is a rapidly growing source of emissions, but we are starting from a good position because there is strong leadership from the International Maritime Organization, or IMO, that has set clear targets to get to net zero by 2050 and several policies to reduce emissions along that trajectory. So there is strong policy leadership, but it's important to get near-term emissions reductions given how long these ships remain in operation. This slide shows the different paths to take to get to net zero by 2050. And once again, it's a full portfolio of solutions. There's efficiency improvements like wind assist and drag reduction, using hybrid powertrains. In the near term, some types of ships are already suitable for conversion to zero emission, like ferries and harbor craft. In the long term, new fuels will probably be needed. Ammonia is really promising. Methanol is also being considered, and in the long term, maybe even hydrogen-powered ships. And once again here, biofuels are being considered, but it's really important to look at the life cycle emissions associated with biofuels and make sure that we are not actually increasing upstream emissions and using the limited supply of high quality biofuels where they're most necessary. So that covers my presentation. I know it's a lot of information trying to cover all of this space. We are happy to share these slides with everyone, and I look forward to seeing your questions and discussing later in this session. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dale, for your very comprehensive outline of what can be, what policies, what targets, what type of modes, and what type of decarbonization strategies countries can use depending on their local context, right? So we've been talking about how in GCAP we are very much demand driven, but I think you give everyone an outline because every country, every city will have a very different modal share or different geographic or, you know, temporal conditions that a different mode might be the best aspect for them to decarbonize. So I love the outline that you put out, the broader overview, so countries have a broad selection to think through. So Dale, there were a few questions that came up in the chat, so feel free to maybe jump in and put in your details as well. But after we finish with the other two panelists, we can open it up to a broader Q&A session. So thank you again, Dale. And with that, we're going to move on to Carolina Chantrill, who leads the e-mobility work in Susentar. So over to you, Carolina.
Thank you, Sanjini, and thank you, Aaron and Dale, for the previous presentations. Especially Dale's presentation is quite comprehensive, so I'm glad for that. I'm just going to share my screen. Let me know if it's showing okay.
Yes, I see it.
Thank you, perfect. So as Sanjini said before, I'm Carolina Chantrill. I'm Director of Sustainable Mobility at Sustentar. Sustentar is part of the Global Climate Action Partnership and has been involved for many years now, especially for working within the platform, the regional platform of Let's Flag. So I'm going to give you just a couple of details of what we've been doing. Basically, we got strongly involved in working regarding transport transition with resilient and low emission strategies for the transport sector. We started working with this kind of like working group of transport in 2014. And by this time, we involved with like more than 1,700 people from 50 different countries. For the LAC region, we kind of like created two subgroups or communities of practice that were focusing on how to promote the transition towards electric mobility as one of the key solutions, as Dale was presenting before. And we also had a group on sustainable logistics that had not only taking into account not only electric mobility solutions for the logistics and freight sector, but also energy efficiency and many other strategies. This transport group for the region is implemented by Sustentar with the support of NVEL, and we've been collaborating also not only within the Global Climate Action Partnership, but also with the Clean Energy Solutions Center. Just to mention that, providing technical assistance, we've done some work with these requests for technical assistance and support from the Clean Energy Solutions Center, so I'm glad for that. What I'm going to talk about today is that this year, we started early this year trying to incubate a group that could set a high ambition goal for the region in complementary to what the countries already submitted as part of the NDCs and LTS. The objective of this group is try to create more collective goals around this transition, focusing specifically on electric mobility in public sector. The benefits of being part of the group is to access more of the resources and tools that we had through the network with the transport working group, but also with all the partners and organizations that are part of the Global Climate Action Partnership and the Let's Flag platform. We also provide spaces for peer learning, and the idea is that we promote project cooperation among members. We provide also an opportunity to showcase initiatives of the actions or plans and goals that these actors are implementing regional and global events. And we also provide technical assistance for the members that are kind of like putting forward this ambition in the sector. What we've done so far is we started with a call of interest to all our member base. And from there, we coordinated and conducted a first collaboration session. The idea of the session was starting to identify opportunities and the themes that could be of interest to, to ignite this ambition through this group in the region. The phase that we are right now is creating all the information and the ideas that came out of that collaboration session. We are also collecting information and interest from doing one-on-one exchanges with some of these actors. And we are also starting a new round of technical assistance with some of them to identify a little better, like, requirements of the goal that we would like to set for the region. We'll be conducting a second collaboration session. The idea there is to validate this common goal for the region. And from there, we'll start working on how to promote the implementation towards coming, getting to that goal together. The idea is there is to support the implementation of actions through all the resources that we had at hand. And it's a video of like networking through all the members, link with funding opportunities for them. We'll publish a regional transport strategy, co-produced and co-defined with these actors. And of course, we'll do the public communication of the goal and the priority actions, different upcoming events, such as the GCAP Global Workshop, the Let's LAC Regional Workshop, COP29 this year, and probably next year, COP30. What we found, or what we got at this first collaboration session, with some of the interests and opportunities through this conversation. And basically this comes as how to better coordinate between authorities, promote joint efforts among these organizations and agencies to increase the ambition for the next round of NDCs, specifically focusing in public transport and electrification. Also identify the gap for accomplishing these goals by how we identify what is missing in NDCs, what has to be done in order to allow those commitments to get to the goal. Then knowledge exchange around what mechanisms could be used to share the lessons learned through all these processes that all the actors are going through, prepare projects through technical assistance, developing strategies also for the financing of the actions and the commitments of each country or subnational government, how to deploy quicker the electric infrastructure that it's needed in cities for making attractive the market for electric vehicles, and to ensure that there is interoperability within the region, and how to enhance and provide a network of data that it's collected to inform not only decisions but also show how much we are advancing on this goal. Who are part of these groups so far? We have representatives of 2 national governments, 2 subnational governments, and 2 transport operators, with also 2 global and regional organizations. These are representing at least 8 countries in the region. We are working with people from Chile, Peru, Panama, Colombia, Ecuador, El Salvador, Mexico, and Costa Rica. And as part of one of the inputs for this work we are doing, we conducted a mapping exercise of the NDCs in at least 9 countries. Most of them are the ones that are actually involved in one way or the other with this group. And what we found so far in these countries is that there are different levels of advancement in the NDCs. The latest one in these countries was submitted by Chile, but they are still needed updating NDCs for many of the other ones. Something that comes up is that most of the goals are actually set as an absolute goal and not a relative one. That means that if the context changes, if the trends changes, it's difficult to compare depending on like the dimension of the footprint for each country. So we need to set different criteria, at least a way to actually compare the goals that each country has. Some other thing that came up was that many of the countries have conditional goals. That means that they are setting a goal that depends on financing mostly, or other actions that are not maybe being implemented so far. And in terms of electric mobility commitments, we found that many of the countries actually have goals or NDCs related to electric mobility. However, not all of them have actually a comprehensive way of incorporating electric mobility in all modes or in all ways. So we found that many are focusing in public transport. Some of them are including goals for private passenger transport, but we are still missing a little bit of the complementary of energy efficiency, fleet migration, and some of the other measures that actually Dale was mentioning as complementary for making these strategies integral enough to accomplish the net zero scenario. So the conclusions of this mapping exercise, and what we also been discussing with the ambition group, is that there is no established criteria among countries. That's not only hard for comparison, but also to measure what's the progress as a region. There are greater commitments needed in the region, specifically to be explicit on the energy transition goals for the sector. So we do see commitments around electric mobility, but maybe that's not necessarily linked, for example, to a cleaner energy matrix. So basically, that's needed there. We do see progress in the region. However, in many cases, it's not visible because of the lack of information to make, explicit how much we are actually contributing to accomplishing these goals. Some countries, they are lacking a lot of coordination between these sectors, and that's part of one of the major barriers. Also, there is, as I said, they have prioritized the electric mobility as a strategy for both public and private passenger transport over freight transport. So we do see a need to promote more commitments and actions in the freight sector. But on the other hand, prioritizing public sector not only allows for a transition of the sector in terms of clean energy, but also it allows to promote more inclusive and resilient and low emission urban environments, in the sense that public transport is one of the key elements in a sustainable mobility scenario. And last but not least, there are external financing restrictive situations. As we said, at least 3 of the 9 countries we analyzed, they could only have met their ambitious goals if financing is actually provided through international programs or support. With that, I just want to say that thank you for the space for today to tell you a little bit of what we've been doing. I want to encourage everyone that might be interested in knowing a little bit more of the work that we are doing around NDCs for the transport sector in LAC, but also maybe to be part of this ambition group. So you can either reach out to me, or you can reach out to the organizers of the session so they could provide contact information. The ones that are actually working in Sustentar with this initiative are Martina Pugno and Agustina Besada as coordinators of our work with NREL, and we will be more than glad if you want to join or provide any insight for continuing our work. So thank you so much for the time, Sanjini.
Thank you, Carolina. Thanks for taking the time to come and present to us about the leadership group in Latin America focused on sustainable transport. I do want to say this concept of leadership group, we also have a clean transport leadership group for Asia as well, and it's the it's a very similar idea as you know, this is through 2 of our regions within GCAP, and the goal is that regional cooperation or learning together and working towards aligned similar targets can actually be an opportunity to scale up. So as you know, there's much commonality across national targets. So even though each country will be at a different local context or a different level when it comes to whether it's transitioning to e-buses or some other aspect, there's much that we can work on together. So the opportunity to scale up exists through a cooperation, collaborative initiative within the region as well. So anyone who's interested in working with your neighboring country or working with a group of transport leads, please reach out to Carolina for the Latin American perspective, and reach out to me or any of the organizers if you're interested in more details about the Asia version of the leadership group as well. So with that, thanks again, Carolina. And so we are going to now move on to the next speaker. And our next speaker may speak in Spanish. So whoever prefers English or a language of your choice, please go to the toolbar. It's the 3 dots at the bottom and select the captions depending on your preference. So as you saw, there's a thread across through all our speakers, right? We started off showing the global platforms that support scaling up and raising ambition in your NDCs and LTSs. And then we had a very comprehensive discussion with Dale Hall about all the policy actions and the technical areas within the transport sector that countries can work on. And so now we moved on through Carolina's presentation, what type of collaboration one countries can participate in with the needs of the regions. So now we move on to understanding a case study, and we move on to a speaker from UNFCCC. His name is Paul Sanchez, and he will speak to us about a case study from Quito. And yes, we look forward to your presentation. Please introduce yourself, and over to you, Mr. Sanchez.
I am electronic engineering and related with the rail transportation and infra systems, such as trains or trolleybuses. And now we can share with you a little experience related with the Quito project, when there is a new fleet in progress of acquired from the majority of Quito, Ecuador, is in order to renew the old fleet of trolleybuses. And there is some aspects that we can share with you. Can you see my screen?
Let me see. I don't see your screen yet. Okay. Now I see your screen.
Of course.
Great. Thank you.
And GNOPS is an office of projects from United Nations, and in Quito, Ecuador, is support a process to acquire a new fleet of trolleybuses from Quito, Ecuador, in order to renew the old fleet. The agenda is wait a moment, please. In this way. The agenda, the context of the scope that involves the project, some info about the master planning about the urban mobility of Quito, Ecuador, the present situation of the trolleybus fleet, the scope of the project, new fleet of trolleybuses is the main goal of objective of our support here in Ecuador, and some NDC that is highlighted on this project from Quito, Ecuador. Also, some additional brands or arms that was developed here in the project. Finally, focus on GDA and NDC terms. First one, the context. The project is located on Ecuador. Ecuador is located in the northwest or from South America area. Quito is located on Ecuador. Is the capital of the country. Some actual mobility challenge. The first one is to improve the quality of the air. It means reduce emissions for use of another kinds of oil consumption on the fleets. Second one is to spread the use of the fleets in some areas of the city. Integrate all transportation systems that is involved in the cities, such as buses, now the metro system, and in near future, systems such as telepheric. And third, to improve active physique of the people involved cycles or another kinds of activity, the physical activities, and reduce the private vehicles on the city. The legal aspect is involved. First one is the main legal leader of the country is the called Constitución Política del Ecuador. The second one is transport and transit organic law. Local laws and ordinances related with mobility management of the transit and transport, use and planning of urban planning of the city. And technical is related with the called INEC norm, such as the 58 related with the emissions. Now, a little explain about the master mobility sustainable planning of the city. It involves 5 objectives related to mitigate emissions or the emissions, to articulate mobility systems with the territory and the heritage of the involved in the city. To management the mobility under a focus of to protect the life and to recognize the needs related with the diversity. The objective 4 to promote the system of public transport with quality on the city, and to achieve integrated system for mobility based on multi-mode systems of transport. The main goals to reduce the emissions. The second one is to improve the experience of the transport in the town. To precise, public transport modes sustainable on the city, implemented in the various kinds of mobility transport system that there is available now. To incorporate a 25% of the financial supplies alternative related with mobility, reduce 50% of the deaths and injuries by the accidental transport system. Main lines of action of PMS to rescue and to improve the grade of the transport public on the town, manage of the demand with a new policies and new mobility dynamics involved with the economical, environment, and social facts, and to promote mobility modes, active DOMs, and to improve the public space. What we want to achieve to reduce emissions in 75%, to save lives in 2,595 people on a period of 20 years, to reduce in 30% the head weight and the time to transport in public systems. Benefits, qualitative benefits of this master planning is to increase for the city involved with these habitants, and to enjoy the public space, to improve the human environment, the urban environment. The actual fleet of the public transportation enterprise here in Quito, it handles some areas, some corridors of transport. For example, between Recreo and Labrador is the trolley line. The red ones represent a corridor handled with only diesel buses. The black ones represent the actual Metro first line that was deployed the last year here in Quito. The public enterprise transport system use electric buses and also diesel buses. With the first one, the area that is attended is between Quitumbe and Labrador, a corridor approach of 20 kilometers. The second one is the Ecovia Oriental between Guamaní and Rio Coca, and the same length. The fleet to attend this demand, there is a fleet of 113 trolley buses. Basically is a brand Mercedes-Benz line of 505G with a motor, diesel motor of Mercedes-Benz, plus a gearbox ZF. And the traction system was developed by the German company Keep Electric. The kind of motor that was used to improve to actionate the trolley buses is a motor Bazoo brand ABB with 270 kVA of power, rating power. The supply power from the overhead catenary system is 150 DC voltage. And from the DC fleet, there are 200 units, biarticulate and articulate. Now, we can share with you the scope of the new fleet, the support of UNFs in the project. There was an agreement with the majority of Quito, Ecuador and UNFs. The length of the project is 18 months with a scope of $32 million. Okay. I translate to Spanish. Las actividades específicas, elaboración de las especificaciones técnicas, términos de referencia, documentos de licitación, adquisición de 60 trolebuses, es el alcance del proyecto, del acompañamiento, optimización de operaciones y flota a través de estudio operacional para las troncales trolebús, ecovía y sus alimentadores. El convenio también tiene el alcance del transporte y trámites de aduana, recepción y entrega a la empresa pública metropolitana de transporte de pasajeros de Quito. De igual forma, incluye la capacitación del personal en sitio y el gerenciamiento del proyecto. Podemos ver el alcance a la actividad 1, adquisición de trolebuses, la homologación de los trolebuses, que es una directiva local, en la cual pues todo vehículo nuevo pues tiene que ser validado y homologado para que pueda operar en la ciudad. ¿Sí? Dentro del alcance también cuenta la acreditación del taller en donde va a recibir mantenimiento la flota nueva. Esto para que dentro del periodo de garantía pues las actividades puedan ser validadas por el proveedor de la flota. La actividad 4, capacitación de personal técnico, operadores y conductores dentro del alcance para que tengan el conocimiento, adquieran el conocimiento y la transferencia tecnológica de las nuevas soluciones tecnológicas implementadas en la flota y obviamente pues lo que los conductores estarán en contacto con el nuevo interfaz dentro de la unidad. También incluye la actividad 5, que es el suministro de repuestos para la flota. Aquí destacar que la normativa local pues exige un periodo de vigencia tecnológica de al menos 7 años.
Hey, Paul.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. At in the Zoom toolbar, if you go to can you just set your speaking language to Spanish so that the captions will automatically translate for the rest of the audience?
Of course. Let me try, please. On Zoom, ¿no?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you go to more at the bottom, más, and then
Si vas a subtítulos, porque está en español. Subtítulos.
oh yeah.
CC subtítulos. Ajá. Y mostrar subtítulos, el idioma en que hablo. Hay que cambiarlo para español.
Listo.
Ajá, ahí está. Gracias.
De acuerdo. ¿Funciona? It works. Ok.
Creo que sí, hay que ver.
Ok. Bueno, a continuación, pues, se hace un desglose del planning o del cronograma que se aplica al proyecto, pues, iniciando en junio de este año. Básicamente, pues, ahí pueden ver las actividades iniciales del proyecto, envío de diseño, aprobación, luego la fase de prototipo. Básicamente tenemos una primera unidad que se está ya trabajando o discutiendo la parte de diseño, arrancado ya la fabricación de la primera unidad y pues luego de eso se realizarán las pruebas FAT, luego las pruebas SAT en sitio, con ello poder validar, homologar la solución de la primera unidad y habrá básicamente un segundo lote que implica la entrega de las 59 unidades. Esto, como está indicando en el cronograma, pues está planteado para marzo del próximo año. Nuevamente, el tema de la homologación, en el cual es un proceso local del país que hace la exigencia para estas unidades, cualquier unidad nueva, ¿no?, que va a ser internada en el país. Sin ese proceso de homologación, pues básicamente no puede circular una unidad. El tema de acreditación del taller, las capacitaciones tanto al personal técnico como obviamente a los operadores o conductores de las unidades. ¿Sí? Hasta aquí, no sé si tienen alguna inquietud. Seguimos.
Any questions from anyone at this stage?
Seguimos. La nueva flota de trolebuses. Pueden ver en la siguiente lámina la disposición y diseño exterior, pues se trata de unidades articuladas de 18 metros que cuentan básicamente con un sistema de tracción totalmente eléctrico. ¿Qué significa esto? A diferencia de la flota actual, que tiene un sistema de emergente a combustión, pues las nuevas unidades son totalmente eléctricas. Su sistema de respaldo básicamente es una batería de tracción que le da una autonomía de 70 kilómetros por situaciones de emergencia. La disposición, el layout interno, como ustedes pueden ver, 32 asientos para pasajeros, más un espacio para personas de movilidad reducida y una capacidad total de 160 pasajeros. ¿Sí? Un poco en la siguiente lámina podemos ver la disposición y el diseño exterior. Como pueden notar, tiene accesos por los dos lados. Esto es debido a una condición de operación impuesta por la empresa operadora del sistema, en la cual pues básicamente quiere la flexibilidad de que estos trolebuses puedan operar en todos sus corredores, y ellos tienen paradas en los cuales tienen sentido de circulación en contraflujo y por ello también tienen puertas al lado izquierdo. ¿Sí? Un poco en la siguiente lámina, pues un breve esquema de la capacitación va a ser de tipo teórico y práctico. Obviamente la interfaz que va a tener el conductor referente a la flota antigua de hace 29, 30 años cambia mucho. Los conductores tienen que hoy tener un conocimiento del nuevo interfaz que va a tener, del modo de conducción, de las bondades que tiene el trolebús en cuanto a comunicación interna, externa, envío de datos en línea, botones de pánico incorporados y otra serie de situaciones que ellos tienen que saber manejar en el accionamiento del trolebús. Como indicado, no es solo la capacitación a los conductores, sino también es la transferencia tecnológica al personal técnico para que ellos puedan, a su vez, llevar de mejor manera las labores de mantenimiento preventivo y correctivo. Contribución a las NDC. Bueno, como país, Ecuador ha hecho una formulación de NDCs para el periodo 2026-2035. Nuestro proyecto, pues, tiene una relación directa con la NDC relacionada a energía. Pueden ustedes ver que estamos alineados con lo que es el tema de movilidad sostenible, proyectos de electromovilidad y transporte eléctrico masivo. De hecho, las ordenanzas actuales vigentes en Quito tienden a que ya las futuras flotas incorporen solo sistemas eléctricos para eliminar el tema de esto de emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero.
Mr.
¿Sí?
Sanchez?
Sí.
Yeah, thank you so much. We are 10 minutes to the end of the presentation. I was wondering if we can leave some room for some Q&A.
Okay, of course.
Okay, thank you so much. And I really appreciate this example, and I appreciate the fact that it focuses on public transit As we heard even from our other two previous speakers, and thinking through the framework of avoid, shift, improve, the avoiding miles and shifting to a different mode includes moving on to public transportation, and decarbonizing public transportation can be a significant pathway towards decarbonizing the road transport sector. So thank you so much for this example. I hope the audience found all of the speakers' presentations useful. I would like to now open it for a few questions. We have 8 more minutes. Yes, so please turn on your video, audio, and ask questions from specific speakers if you like, or please continue to add them to the chat.
Thank you for the opportunity, and you are welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Sanchez. Maybe for the few minutes that we have, may I ask Dale Hall, there was a question early on about charging infrastructure lacking in the continent of Africa, and thinking through strategies on how that impacts electric vehicle deployment. So I'm wondering, maybe we can open that up as a general question to the speakers. Carolina, happy to have you also input on, is this a consideration or a gap that the leadership group sees as well as maybe a challenge towards deployment of more electric vehicles? So I'll open it up to all the panelists to respond to that. Thank you.
Sure, I can take a go at that. Yeah, I mean, building charging infrastructure is one of the biggest challenges in transitioning to zero-emission vehicles, but it's very dependent on the type of vehicle that you're talking about and the local context. One thing we always stress is that, especially for lighter vehicles, two-wheelers, cars, vans, light trucks, the vast majority of charging can take place at home or at workplaces, and in most cases don't need substantial electrical grid upgrades. They can use like the normal circuits that are available at buildings. And especially for two-wheelers, motorcycles, sort of thing, the power demands are very low and shouldn't pose any risk to the electrical grid. So that's a great place to start, very cost effective, and really no reason to delay. And that's why we're seeing in a lot of countries, 2- and 3-wheelers are kind of the tip of the spear of the transition. For cars and vans, the needs are a bit greater, especially for enabling long distance travel and charging for vehicles like taxis that need a lot of charges every day to complete their driving. And then for trucks, it's an even greater challenge, but really important for meeting climate and air quality goals. So I think it's important to start preparing ahead of time and work with the power sector, with the electrical utilities, to understand what the demands are going to look like in the future and understand where there is spare capacity on the grid, and plan sort of the vehicles and the infrastructure together. So we have some resources about this on the ICCP website that I can share, a lot of good best practices, and we're working on some more examples specifically for emerging markets. I mean, we're doing a project with Kenya on planning charging infrastructure for buses and commercial vehicles around Nairobi, and doing some broader kind of templates that other governments can follow. So it is a big challenge, but there are easy places to start without a lot of electrical challenges. And then it's just important to get all the stakeholders on the same page about the expectations for the longer term planning.
Awesome. Thanks, Dale. Maybe on a similar topic, actually, I was just thinking, you know, when we talk about charging infrastructure, there's always the connections to the grid. And maybe we can talk through Mr. Sanchez. I don't know if you have a minute to come on and say what were the grid impact considerations for the Quito EV bus transition. What roles and responsibilities were established between utilities and bus transit leads. It would be good to know because this can be the coordination piece that countries would have questions about. So maybe Mr. Sanchez, if you can come online and talk a little bit about that. And I wonder, we can then follow up some final remarks from Carolina, as I heard you mentioned in your leadership group that bus electrification of buses is one of the key priorities, and how these considerations will be addressed in the leadership group as well. So over to you, Mr. Sanchez, and then Carolina for a few last comments before we close in 2 minutes.
Of course. About the questions, let me share the screen in order to refer to what the main message about electromobility, please. Here in Quito Ecuador project, we are involved with the public enterprise of transport and with ANT in order to process the homologation related with the homologation process. So mobility secretary of the majority of Quito Ecuador, and with the customs office from the city, from the country, apologies, in order to coordinate the custom clearance of the fleet and the homologation here in Ecuador. And also with the electric enterprise from the city in order to confirm the voltage levels that we have at disposal to supply the fleet. So with the use of the fleet, we can reduce the aspects related with the air pollution. For example, to reduce in 50% of the CO2 emissions. Also, we are working on to electric buses. Yeah. Now we are involved in order to support the majority here in Quito with the electric mobility related with transport fleet of buses in order to improve and to guide about these new kind of technologies. For example, the supercharging system for the electric fleets. There is a new project in the near future.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Sanchez. Carolina, do you have any final comments before we close on how to engage with the leadership group, what activities to expect, and any outcomes that you would like to share with us?
Well, yeah, I have a lot of ideas and comments, but we do have 1 minute. So I'm just going to say that it is really important to understand how complex the mobility systems are. What is actually feeding into the demand of transport services or mobility services? I'd like to talk about more mobility than transport. And on the other side of things, what things are needed to actually respond to that demand. So if electric mobility is part of the solutions that we are looking at, those services, we need to understand how much that service is going to grow, or it's needed to grow in order to have, you know, resilient, inclusive, and productive economies. We need to understand how that's going to change over time. And we know uncertainty is kind of like the key thing that we always find out. It's one of the challenges. So in order to look at the whole system and mapping all the actors, mapping all the needs, demands, and then all the requirements, we'll find out where we need to work on and where we are like, you know, where we are standing in terms of like making that transition. So that's a conversation that we want to promote within the Ambition group, to understand what are the enablers of the transitions we need to do, and what are the things that could be complementary to make that thing, you know, actually actionable and like accomplish the goal. We understand that we need to work on the regulatory system, like frameworks. There is no way we can like deploy more infrastructure, like energy charging infrastructure, if we are not like setting at least how we are going to charge for that, who is paying for that, how we are paying for that. We cannot like deploy a lot of electric vehicles if we are not actually increasing the renewable energy generation. We are not going to solve the mobility issues, even if we have all electrified systems, if half of the population are not accessing to those services. So when we start thinking about those things, some countries have huge strength in working in some of those spheres within the complex system, but probably they'll have to work on enable something else in the system. So that's something that we want to work on. And I'm glad that it was mentioned either by Paul's example of Quito, but also at Dale's, that how national actions should be aligned to all these national policies, the NDCs, and how that all actually is feeding into having a net zero economy. Because it's not only about net zero emissions transport systems, it's about how we actually are decarbonizing our economies, how we are decoupling the emissions of greenhouse emissions from our economic growth and development. And speaking from Latin America and from a country and a region that wants to grow and has a lot of like leading examples and many transitions in terms of like technological transition as Chile, or energy transition as Costa Rica, or policies transition as Uruguay, and I can mention a lot of other examples. We are still need to work a lot on how, and not lose from our goals that what we are trying to do is a much better country, world, region for the population that it's living in these countries. So that's what I'm going to leave. And as you said, Sanjini, everybody is welcome to reach out, get engaged, or either provide insight or request something that we might be able to help with through this network and this group of Ambition. So thank you again for the time and the space today to talk about this. And thank you to all the other panelists also for sharing their knowledge and experience.
Awesome. Thank you, Carolina. As always, great final thoughts and words for all of our participants to keep in mind as they move forward, planning towards decarbonizing the road transport sector. So with that, I think we are going to close this webinar. Thank you for the great engagement. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to all the participants. We look forward to hearing from you, and do stay engaged with us. Join our initiatives and our platforms for further information about future webinars as well. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your week. Thank you.